Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. And as we look forward to listening to Dave and Chris, it just warms my heart to see you. I will tell you, I've been working with women for 10 years. And if they could just see all of you, they would just really truly break down crying to know that you cared enough about them to learn more about domestic abuse. I just want to say, our goal is for all of us to learn to be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. I was just reading in Ephesians 4, verse 1 today that, we want to walk worthy, right? Worthy of our calling and help others walk worthy. And that's that patience and gentleness and helping men and women walk into who they are in Christ. I know we kind of lift women up from the floor in our classes, and then the guys have to be kind of pulled down so we can meet in the middle with mutuality and respect and learning how to honor one another. I want to do a really quick poll just for the sake of our panelists and myself to see kind of where you are as far as your training level. So Emily, want to wave. She's our wonderful assistant. So go ahead and take just a minute and go ahead and do that poll. All right, so I'm excited because most of you have not had a lot of training and most of you don't have a care team approach, which is really important. So I'm so glad you're here because you're going to learn about these things today. And those of you who have training will leave, like I will leave, with a lot more to learn. Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to just go ahead and introduce Dave. Just to let you know our kind of schedule. Dave's going to speak for 20 minutes. We're going to have about a 10-minute time of Q&A just for Dave. Chris will speak for 20, and then we'll have like 25 minutes after that, 25, where you can ask questions of Chris and then of both of them. So Dave is a lead pastor at Christ Community Church in Camp Hill, which is outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And they've had our flyers, our Witness flyers in the restroom stalls for 10 years. Of all the churches in the country, now I'm in Oregon, of all the churches in the country, we have had the most women come through a program from Dave's church. And Dave will share part of his story, but this past year, he has really stepped up to the plate. One of the guests from his church was actually in my class this past year. And so I'm getting firsthand information like, man, Dave stood up in front of everyone and said, we're not going to tolerate abuse in our church. And it's like, whoa. So that's really one of the reasons why I wanted Dave to be on with us for our annual Pastor Summit. And again, he's worked very hard to put together a care team. And we have part of his care team with us today, which is exciting. So Dave, why don't you go ahead and share what God has laid on your heart?
Okay. Thanks so much. Good to be with you. I thought it would be helpful if I just gave you kind of a thumbnail sketch of our journey of discovery, and it had lumps and bumps and tears and cheers along the way. But I did not grow up in an abusive home. Grew up in a wonderful Christian home. Mom and Dad loved each other, loved us. We're in Pennsylvania, which we think PA stands for passive aggressive. So I never saw Mom and Dad scream at each other, but they were, we just process things, and so I was oblivious to the real issue of domestic abuse. I knew it existed, had no idea it existed as much as it is, and in the church. And so just my personal journey, this happened a few years ago, but I was reading the story of the Good Samaritan, and I came upon that phrase, a certain man fell among thieves. And I always thought that here was a guy who was mugged one time by strangers, but I discovered that the word fell among means to be embraced by, surrounded by, controlled by, and then abused by others. And I saw the progression of a man making choices relationally and suffering the results of connecting with abusive people. And it left him beaten and bleeding alongside the road. And the punchline of the story, as we know, the two religious leaders walked by on the other side of the road, either because of ignorance or indifference. And to see the punchline that we should have been involved, we should be involved, we need to step in, no matter what it costs us in terms of time and finance, we must step in. And it began to awaken me to the reality of domestic abuse. And so I began to plunge in. I started to read. I read a book by Lundy Bancroft called Why Does He Do That? And a book by Jeff Crippen called Unholy Charade, when abuse comes to church. And then a book by Chuck DeGroat, When Narcissism Comes to Church. In fact, I did a deep dive. I don't know how many books. My wife says over 12, but I just began to dig in what's going on, what's happening, and my eyes began to be opened, the need to be involved. And it challenged me then as a pastor to re-examine scriptures that have been used to either cover or actually even condone domestic abuse. Scriptures like Malachi 2:16 and words like submission and forgiveness, and an interpretation of Jesus' teaching on divorce. I began to just re-examine all that I had been taught, all that I had been settled on in those passages, and it led me, I guess I would say, to repent. To be willing to have a new heart and a new view and a new understanding, and to allow the Holy Spirit to teach me some fresh things. And so he did. I began to repent of what I now would consider personally to be bad theology. When I discovered that Malachi 2:16, although it's frequently translated God hates divorce, and it's slapped upon women to say, don't even think of getting out of this abusive relationship, to see that it more literally means God hates treacherous abuse. God hates well-concealed abuse. And to see that the word submission means a mutually deferring to one another in a culture of honor, not one person controlling another person. To see that when Jesus taught on divorce, it was in situations where Pharisees were trying to trap him in his words. And he used it as an opportunity not to give an extensive teaching on divorce, but to trap them in their ways of using divorce to further abuse women. And so we had to also take a look at hurtful policies, or I would say twisted ways of dealing with abusive situations in the church, where we were more prone to guard the institution of marriage and ignore the victims of abusive relationships, where we would, my response to marital problems was immediately bring the couple in together and try to process things together, and to realize that we were only playing into the hands of abusive spouses to get further information to then be used against the other spouse. Had to look at the fact that we constantly were talking about the divorce crisis while ignoring the abuse crisis facing the church, and how we would honor the length of marriage and not examine the quality of marriage. Celebrate calendar numbers, but not look at what was really happening in those homes. And one of the biggest things was being inclined to not believe the victim, and to feel that there's more of a possibility that the person expressing concern about abuse would be deceived. And our first conclusion, she's deceived, not he's abusive. And so we had to begin to face these things, to this posture of shaming women who've separated or divorced for their own safety and the safety of their children, and then having a limited view of abuse as either being physically hurt or being cheated on in adultery, and ignoring the whole realm of verbal and emotional abuse, which is atrocious. So as these convictions began to grow inside of me, I started to pull our leaders in, and we began to read books together and then process the books together. And it was quite a challenging time, but a worthwhile time. And any pastors here connected today, I would encourage you to do the deep dive and consider processing with your teams this whole issue. Jeff Crippen's book on Holy Charade was the specific book we used on our initial study of the issue, and then we started to train our leaders in the church to someone comes forward and says they're being abused, believe them. And then as well, learn to empower them. Don't step in to control someone who's been controlled. Do more listening, be quicker to listen and slower to speak. Then we saw the need to move beyond just being aware, but to do something. And so we began to give the opportunity to gather people together. We had meetings after the Sunday morning service, and let it be known, if you have any concern about abuse, you're aware of abuse, you're in abuse, please come, we'd like to talk. And we had quite a number of people gather, and it was from that gathering that a team emerged and some champions. This wonderful couple in our church, good friends, but they'd walked through their own experiences with abuse, and they have become our champions. They've gathered together a team of people that are approaching the issue of abuse through intervention. They've got counselors on the team. We've got safe houses. We've got people that are stepping in to give legal support and financial support to those in need. And I would just say, we say, well, that sounds like a lot to do. We just felt that the Lord was telling us, start. Just step in. Just start to do something, and then watch what he would do. And I was amazed at how he added to and built the team and built the momentum. And one of the things that I realized I needed to do was I needed to acknowledge when I was preaching on certain topics. I needed to clarify what I was not saying and what I was saying. That when I talk about forgiveness, I am not saying automatically get back into an abusive cycle and just let bygones be bygones. And also seeing that so often we like happy endings in the church, and I think that's great. We like great testimonies, and I love that too. I'm sappy that way. I do cry at Hallmark movies with my wife. So I love to see things turn around, but sometimes, like the prophet Jeremiah said, don't be superficial with your wounds and say peace, peace, when there's no peace. And sometimes we like everything tied up in a nice, neat bow, and it's not that way. So I had to begin to do that, but I had to take some tough stance, and I let the church know that in this house we are not going to condone a domestic abuse under the guise of headship or submission or one-sided covenant keeping. That we're going to be on the lookout here. And we want to help, and we want to help both those who are being abusive and those who are being abused. And so Chris's book has been helpful as well in how to establish a church that deals with domestic abuse, but we're also being open to deal with those who are abusers. And so this is a journey we're on. and this is how it got started, and we're still learning. I'm here today to hear questions, concerns, because we just want to grow and be the heart of Jesus to people. So that's my story.
Thank you so much, Dave, for sharing.
Mhm.
Emily, are there any questions that came into the chat or previously that we can ask Dave right now?
Somebody asked, how do we identify wolves and how do we stop them?
That's a great question. Because frequently, the word that Jesus used is the word hypocrite, which doesn't mean someone who's struggling to do what's right and make some mistakes. No, this is someone who's deliberately deceptive and a very good actor. I believe that this is a spiritual issue as well as a relational issue, and we need to ask the Lord to give us discernment, because frequently the images that are presented and projected can be very, very well concealed. And let me tell you when this became extra real to me. I'm doing all of this study. We're proceeding as a church, and I get a call one night from my daughter, who's been married 16 years to a ministry leader, and she lets me know that she's scared in her own house, and she's been hiding it for years because she didn't want to embarrass us or hurt the church. And we began to see that that wolves in sheep's clothing can be very well disguised and very well concealed. And so the Lord began to open our eyes, and we saw trends. And I think as I love the promise that the path of the righteous gets brighter and brighter until the full day. The more you get revelation, you can't unsee it. And not that I ever want to become a cynical person, but I believe that the Lord will increase our awareness so that we can begin to spot it. Even our security team has begun to tell us and our team, I'm watching body language. I'm seeing how families walk into the building. I'm seeing wives who are 10 steps behind with their body language shouting that they're being oppressed, and they're beginning to sense that. So I would say in our own church family, we're getting a heightened awareness, and revelation will only continue.
There are a few questions that did come in. Cheryl, I see your hand. Give me just a second. Was it difficult to get your leadership team on the same page?
No, not really, not to my knowledge. Now, and then as we began to be aware and talk more about abuse, I found that we had our leaders on board pretty quickly. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, another question. Did your church purchase property and maintain it for these women?
We have safe houses, but it seems to be coming from people that are prepared to do that. They're providing extra spaces, or they're actually someone building something right now or in the process of renovating. So it's not something we officially have done as a church, but it's something that our team, as it grows, is currently. We have, I believe I heard the other night from our team leaders that there are 12 women that are being taken care of right now. So it's it's been growing, the awareness, the word of mouth. The grapevine does not always have sour grapes. Sometimes it really does serve a good purpose. So
I do, and so these are people's personal homes typically.
Yeah, get either
Mhm.
homes or apartments.
Apartments, yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to caution. So I lived just north of Dave for about 10 months. My husband was doing some ministry work in the area. And so we were in North Dauphin County, and I went to the help agency out there just to see what resources were available. North Dauphin County is like country, and everything south. There's a mountain pass to go over, and then it's suburbs, and then the city of Harrisburg. And I said to the gal up there, is there any like places where women can live, any shelters? She said, Dan, we used to have safe houses, but we found that that there were too many people getting killed. So do
Wow.
know there's a risk factor.
Mhm.
There is a risk factor. Now, it doesn't happen a lot, but I just need you to know that our work and your work with women, you always really do need to think about safety issues.
Yeah,
Um,
we put in facial recognition cameras around the
mhm,
campus,
mhm.
and we have fed into those the faces of those who are abusers.
Mm.
So
Yeah, that's yeah.
what we need to do and learning to do.
Um, Last year, Steve, we have someone from his church here up in well, you know, Steve, up in Millersburg, again, up in that northern area from Harrisburg. He was sharing that he was helping someone, and he said one day some guy's waiting outside his church with a baseball bat. So you just have to be careful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One other question before I get to you, Cheryl. What was a quote about the quality or quantity of marriage?
Oh, how we'll celebrate married 50 years, married 30 years, as if the goal is to put in time, and yet neglecting to take a good look at the quality of that marriage. So,
Yeah. So Chris is saying to everyone, I recently met a man who builds tiny houses for abuse victims, which is cool. If you are considering owning, operating a safe house, you must consider security waivers, lease agreements, legality in your area. And the church who does this, New Life in Colorado Springs, they're actually trying to do their second home. So New Life Church North, if you're looking for someone else who's doing that, they've been doing it for multiple years. Cheryl, what was your question?
Dave, you gave a good definition of submission, and I was writing something else down, so I didn't
Mhm.
get to that. I was wondering if you could repeat it, please.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Submission is a mutual deferring to one another in a culture of honor. And actually, that passage in Ephesians, when it starts with wives submit, actually it's a carryover from the previous chapter. And when Paul wrote it, there weren't chapters and verses. So the heading of that phrase of that next section really is in the previous verse. Be subject to one another in the fear of Christ. It's a mutual deferring. So it's not simply an assignment given to the wife. And so I'll tell you, as a husband, I'm married 45 years. I would say they're quality years. You need to ask my wife if she feels the same way. But I say that to say, I believe that my role as a husband is to serve and love and care for my wife, be attentive to my wife, nurture my wife, spur her on. We're very different, and they say opposites attract. They can attack at times too, but we're very different. I'm quieter. She's more the vocal person. I love to see her being all that she can be. And I believe the heart of Jesus is to release his church. I mean, Jesus even said, greater works than I did, you'll do. He doesn't seem threatened by the fact that he's releasing us to minister in his name. And I feel like secure husbands who know their identity in Christ are very, very secure in releasing their wife to be all that she is. And there's no competition, no threat. And it's such a mutual, I've heard it described as like the DNA chain. There's a mutual flowing together in gifting and identity.
Dave, you had mentioned this in the previous conversation we had together. So you've had our Oasis Bible Study flyers in your women's restroom stalls. I want to emphasize they go in the women's restroom stalls. A local church here has them up, and I noticed they have one by the sinks and all the others in the restroom stalls. One by the sinks had we have like a 25 page tablet that goes on our flyers. There's like untouched by the sinks.
Yeah.
But women want that privacy because they feel very humiliated, embarrassed, ashamed, and you may never know. You all know someone, but they just haven't, excuse me, they just haven't told you. It's a very shame-based thing because a husband really makes that woman feel very shameful. So Dave, you've had the flyers there for 10 years. Joanne Salyer, who used to be your women's director, was very instrumental in that. She came to one of the trainings I had done way back 10 years ago. But it's only been this past year that you've really stepped up, and you had said in our previous meeting, we had these flyers, and tell us the journey. You kind of hit on that, but the journey you found, well, we've got the flyers too, how we need to be more involved.
Yeah. There's passive involvement and active involvement, and we felt the Lord really was calling us to action. I mean, the history of the early church is not called the studies of the apostles, but the acts of the apostles. They got things in gear, and I feel like it's time. Things will not just go away ignored, and the Father was calling us to step up and step in. And I guess I realize it, and I realize it even more now as it affected me as a natural father, but as a spiritual father, to speak up so that our churches are safe places. And we had a woman who was visiting from out of state come out of one of our women's stalls, came out to speak with me, and virtually grabbed me by the collar and said, she's holding up a flyer from the stall, and she said, I was healed. She said, I was healed to see that. I was healed to see that the church cares about abuse, because I didn't have this. I forget how many years ago when I was walking through abuse. I was healed, and the more she gripped my collar, I thought, I'm going to need healing in a moment. Right. But she was just so grateful that we cared. But that's another reason why we tell our leaders and our teams, when a woman begins to share with you that she's not safe and she's being abused, understand that she's gone through lots and lots of painful mental gymnastics to come to the place where she feels she can trust someone else enough to let them in, and that this is not something that's shared glibly. And in the whole triage of things, we want to believe those that are being victimized, and then down the road we want to help those that are abusing. But it's
Can I just ask? Well, I just got those flyers, and I'm excited to put them in our bathroom stalls. But I realized our pastor wanted to be a part of this today, but he had other things going on. So like I appreciated you saying that, Dave, because like it makes me realize that, well, if someone would do that to someone of the leaders in the church or something, they might go, what? It just makes me realize I need to let our leaders and the pastor know that I did put those in there in case someone goes to them, that would probably be a good thing for them to know about it, and how that all the information is on that flyer, right? For it to get who to contact.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And there's a reason why we call it a Bible study. It is a Bible study. But we want women to be able, if they're still with their husbands, to say, well, honey, I'm just, I'm going to go do my Bible study now. And women, like you, they need to hide the book if they're still with their husbands, and, if they're with us online, being a safe place. But yeah. One real quick story before I introduce Chris, and thank you, Dave, for just did a great job and great questions, everyone. there's a local gal. She had gone to her faith leaders, told them about the abuse. They said, well, they want her to do couples counseling. She said, so I did it just to try to appease the faith leaders. So she said a whole year of couples counseling. She said, Diane, it really was not any different after a year. So I knew I had to leave my husband, which meant I had to leave my church. She went to another local pastor, and Brad Peterson is with us at Grace Chapel in Wilsonville, and she ended up at Grace Chapel, and they've had our flyers for quite some time. So she found the flyers, called us, got in our class, but she tells me, Diane, when I walked into Grace Chapel, and when I went into the women's restroom and saw the flyer, I knew I was in a safe church. It's important for women to feel safe in their churches. And when they see that there's maybe a domestic abuse poster, or information piece on a bulletin board or something in women's restroom stalls, or someone is speaking from the pulpit, that is a great indication that she can maybe go forward and get some help. And if you took that kind of safe church questionnaire, that's at the beginning of kind of phase one, is just having those pieces, but then you need like the training, right, to go with that. So she goes forward. She gets consistent information, like the gal that I mentioned on the landing page for the Pastor Summit. This gal was married 5 years. Went to 2 elders, and they told her, oh, you need to stay, and we don't want you to hear about this anymore. And so she stayed for 15 more years. So their whole team needs to know how to respond well. It's not just a one-man show or just a couple of people. Too many women are being harmed, and they're leaving their churches, and some are leaving their faith. And that's terrible. And this is why we're all together, to try to make a difference for our wounded sisters and men as well.